All right, I think we'll get started here as people are dialing in. Good afternoon. I'm Aaron Pisani, Vice President and Regional Advisor Consultant for Manning and Napier. Before we get started, a couple items of housekeeping for you. First, after the webinar today, you're going to be getting a survey. It's especially important for those of you who are receiving continuing education credit to fill that survey out to receive the credit. Second, if you'd like to ask a question, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will be answering those questions at the end. Okay, well, I want to thank you for your time today, and as we're going to discuss unique opportunities for advisors to grow their practice while working with nonprofit organizations. So personally, I've seen several advisors in my territory significantly grow their assets under management and their revenue by partnering with us and using our resources to work with these nonprofit organizations. One example recently, an advisor team I work with, they acquired a large nonprofit's $32 million endowment account. In their presentation to the board, they shared their value proposition and they discussed what they would do for them as their financial advisor. But what really set them apart was their discussion on ways they can help that organization become stronger and run better. Specifically, they described how they would provide the board with education on fiduciary and governance topics, both annually and when new board members joined. This truly resonated with the board and it set them apart from the rest, and ultimately it won them the business. So as you can see, there's tremendous opportunities in this market for you as advisors. Before we go through with the topic of the day, first off, Manning & Napier, we're an asset management firm with over 50 years of managing money. In fact, I'm pleased to share with you all that we were just named by Barron's as the top overall mutual fund family in 2020. This award was a result of not just one fund or asset class, but due to overall performance by many of our funds collectively. So it's something we're very proud of, and it's a testament to the dedicated long-term process and experience of our research and portfolio management teams. We're headquartered in Rochester, New York, manage about $20 billion across mutual funds, separately managed accounts, and collective investment trusts. And we can be found on multiple broker-dealer platforms, custodians, third-party asset management programs, and retirement plan record keepers. Our strategies include portfolios dedicated to U.S. and non-U.S. equities, fixed income, multi-asset class portfolios, and ETF-based allocation portfolios. So in addition to our portfolio management, we offer many resources for advisors to grow their practice. One area where we have a unique level of expertise is with nonprofit organizations. We've been actually managing money for nonprofits for over 40 years now, and we manage money for approximately 230 organizations currently. In addition to our money management for them, though, we do have a dedicated consulting team that provides resources for you as advisors to use to grow your practice by working with nonprofits as clients. So as I mentioned before, a success story where a team that I work with brought in a $32 million account. Another way this has been successful is that when you work with these organizations, you're working closely with the board members, and oftentimes those are high net worth individuals. So many times my advisor partners not only have acquired the organization's assets as a client, but they've brought on individual board members as wealth management clients as well. So with me today, I have Nick Centennial. Nick is a senior member of our endowment and foundation consulting team. Nick's going to be sharing with you the opportunity that exists in the market today, as well as touch upon some of the challenges they face and why they need advisors like you, and also some ideas on how to begin to prospect. So whether you're working with these organizations currently as clients, or you're looking for ways to enter into the market, we are here to partner with you by providing for you resources and expertise to work with these organizations. So before I bring Nick on, I'm going to ask a poll question. We're going to ask a couple of these today. So the first poll question for you: are you already working with nonprofit organizations? And with that, I'm going to bring it over to Nick.
Yeah, thanks, Aaron. Well, I give people a chance to answer that. I just want to say thank you, everyone, for calling in today. And like Aaron mentioned, I'll give myself a little intro. I am a nonprofit specialist with Manning & Napier. I've been working with nonprofits exclusively for about 10 years now. And in that time, I've sort of learned what makes them tick. I think there's two main points in today's presentation that if you don't remember anything else I say, you should probably remember these two things. It's number one, this is a big opportunity, and we'll talk a little bit about why. But also number two, advising nonprofits is really not that different from advising individuals. The core of both client types are most of the time the same. It's just that nonprofits do things a little differently. It's kind of like they speak a different language. They might be saying the same things as individual investors, but just in a slightly different way. So I think to be successful in this space, you just really have to sort of know the language. You have to know what makes these organizations the same and different from clients that you might already be working with. And I guess in a nutshell, that's why I'm here today. We have a game plan for how to start working with nonprofits, and I'd like to share that game plan with you, or at least as much as I can in about an hour. It's not a lot of time to fit in 10 years worth of lessons that I've learned, but I guess consider this an intro. And we'd love the chance to talk more about this space with you. So hopefully you find this a helpful introduction, and then we'd be happy to talk more afterwards and hopefully give you some helpful info to get started. So why don't we take a look at the poll results? Okay, interesting. Yeah, so just about an even split between those of you who are already working with nonprofits and those of you who aren't. Yeah, so that's great to see. I think that is a good segue into sort of talking about this area of the market as an opportunity. It's an opportunity both for advisors, I think, that are already working with nonprofits, but certainly an opportunity for advisors that have yet to get into this space. Firstly, it's an attractive area from a pure asset standpoint. There's 1.3 million 501c3 organizations. That's the IRS designation for their classification as a nonprofit. There was $450 billion given to charities in 2019. Over the next 50 years, it's estimated that about 97 trillion will change hands in some way in terms of generational wealth transfer. And a lot of that money will be going to nonprofits in the form of a bequest. And then 90% of high net worth households give to charity in some form. So while there are a lot of assets right now sitting in nonprofit organizations, they're expected to get a lot more over the coming years. There's sort of this steady inflow that they get through fundraising and through donations that, again, just makes it a very attractive area of the market, something with a lot of opportunity. This is an attractive area from a networking standpoint. The people who lead these organizations are doctors, lawyers, accountants, business owners, prominent people in the community who are high net worth themselves, and who are people that would be very good to know. This is an attractive area in terms of the range of different opportunities available. There's two main types of nonprofit portfolios that you'll probably encounter, and those are private grant making foundations. Number one, those are like family-run charitable foundations. And then there's also operational foundations. Those are things like hospitals, schools, social services organizations, things like that. But even within these two categories, there's also different subsets. I mean, there's the idea of there's true endowments that come from a donor, and those can either be designated for a specific purpose or undesignated. There are board designated funds that are sometimes called quasi endowments, and their purpose is really at just the discretion of leadership. There are operational reserves, there's stability funds, there's short-term assets. There's a huge variety of different types of funds, but they all need to be invested in some way. And I suppose that's a good way to sum up this opportunity in a nutshell. There's one other reason nonprofits are a big opportunity, and that's that they need a lot of help. And I guess that's where you all come in. Most of the leadership of these organizations, the board and the committees, they're volunteers. They have day jobs. They don't want to get bogged down in the day-to-day management of assets. They want help selecting and monitoring good investments. They want help monitoring and formalizing policies. And many organizations want a plan. They want insight into where things might be heading in the future for their organizations. They want help with tracking their progress towards that future state, whatever it might be. And they also want oversight to give them. They want some oversight, I guess is the way to put it. They want oversight to give them confidence that they're making the right decisions, especially from professional investors who can do things like interpret their objectives that they're trying to achieve, and then match those objectives with an asset allocation that makes sense. So there's many different areas where a nonprofit needs a trusted advisor, but mostly they're just looking for a few ways to make their lives a little bit easier. It's a special person to serve on a volunteer board, and they're looking for other special people to help them. And if you can help, if you can be a trusted resource for an organization and make the lives of board and staff just a little bit easier, they'll love you forever. They'll refer you to all their friends and all the other boards that they sit on. So that's a great opportunity. Okay, there are many unique things about nonprofit clients that differ from individual clients. And what we have in the next section is a good baseline of knowledge about the space to help get you started. So let's go through these one at a time. So the first one up is a fiduciary standard. Many of you probably already know what a fiduciary is and what duties a fiduciary has. Board members at a nonprofit are fiduciaries. They are legally required to put the interests of their organization ahead of their own. The primary fiduciary duties in the nonprofit space are a duty of care, a duty of loyalty, and a duty of obedience. And most important for board members, they are personally, or they can be personally liable if they knowingly violate any of these duties. And so people's ears usually perk up when they hear about personal liability. It means that most board members are interested in what advisors have to offer if you can add another layer of oversight to help them meet their fiduciary duties. And this whole dynamic just doesn't really exist to the same degree in the high net worth space as it does in the nonprofit space. State and federal laws. The two main ones are the Uniform Prudent Management of Institutional Funds Act, also known as UPMIFA, the acronym, and then IRS Section 501c3. UPMIFA is interesting. It's a template law, meaning that every state has its own version of it, but they all pretty much follow the same template overall. But it mainly governs the management and the appropriation. That's a fancy way of basically saying spending. It governs the management and appropriation from endowed assets. It has some pretty specific provisions for how these assets should be managed. So it's definitely something to get a good grasp on. It's something that's important that all nonprofit boards and their advisors should really know about. And then for the IRS regulations, those are just mainly the requirements for how organizations need to keep their nonprofit status. Good to know for advisors, certainly, but they may be a little bit more relevant to their accountants. Investment policy statements. Most of the time, organizations are required by law to have them. It's a way to formalize their goals, formalize the guidelines for how a portfolio will be managed. It acts as a point of continuity as board membership changes. And most nonprofits like to see their advisors take an active role in the policy, making suggestions, monitoring it for need, if any changes are needed over time, or just something as simple as just confirming compliance with it. That can definitely be a point of differentiation for a lot of advisors. Governance and committees. one big difference between individual investors and nonprofits operate in a group dynamic. So fair warning, they can be pretty slow to make decisions because of this. There are committees of the board. A common one is an investment committee. And when a decision has to be made, it's often vetted at the committee level, then brought up to the board for a vote. If there's a change needed, it has to go back to the committee. And so you can see where if boards or committees only meet quarterly or maybe semi-annually, it can take a little bit of time to accomplish something like hiring an advisor or adopting a new policy or whatever. So just know all that going in. Spending rules. These organizations ultimately exist to spend money toward their mission. That's just about as close as you can get to a universal rule, I suppose. Most of the time, they have a formal spending rule to help guide their spending. It's not always the case, but most of the time it is. Sometimes a rule is required by law, and there's different formulas for implementing a rule. There's absolute dollar-based rules, percent-based rules, income-based rules, etc. And probably the most important or crucial thing to know about spending is that it's probably going to be the number one factor determining how a portfolio should be invested. Most of these organizations are long-term or perpetual. Most have what I would call like a middling risk tolerance, where they don't really want full stock market exposure. But there can be a lot of different ranges of different spending needs. And to have a really good grasp on what those are is crucial in making informed decisions on their behalf. So know that about spending rules for nonprofits. And then finally, fundraising. This is probably the most obvious distinction for nonprofits. Many nonprofits fundraise. Private foundations, grant makers, those generally don't, but most operational foundations do. So again, think hospitals, schools, social services, organizations like that. So it's definitely an important source of funding for those types of organizations. For advisors, having a little bit of background in this area can go a long way. You don't need to be an expert, but being at least conversant in fundraising can go a long way towards differentiating yourself. And there may even be some spots where you can offer a little bit of guidance. The philosophy surrounding most fundraising programs is the gift pyramid, like you see here. It's a visual to categorize different types of giving. On the very bottom is annual fund giving. These are like small, regular gifts that come from things like mailings or maybe an online giving page, where the purpose is really sustained annual support. And the next level up, there's major gifts, and those are larger gifts that come from fewer donors. There's capital gifts; those go towards building assets at an organization, a building, or in some cases an endowment. And then at the very top, there's plan gifts. These are state level gifts. So bequests, wills, charitable trusts, things like that. These are the gifts that can be transformational for a lot of organizations. They are large, sometimes they're endowed, but they don't come around. They don't come around that often, and they require a lot of investment and cultivation to make it happen. I guess the one thing I will mention about plan giving, some advisors have a lot of background in estate planning on the individual side, and you can actually use that for nonprofits too. Fundraisers, they want help stepping into the mindset of a high net worth donor. If you can help with this, if you can give them insight into how you help your clients with charitable planning and estate planning, that can be a huge tool. So again, just think about that as something that you might be able to distinguish yourself with, and something that might be able to help a lot of these clients in the area of fundraising. Aaron, let me throw it back to you, and then we can start talking about the next section, which is prospecting.
Sure. Thanks, Nick. Before we start, we have another poll question, and that's: do you have individual clients who sit on nonprofit boards? So while that populates, while we get some poll results, I'll talk a little bit about prospecting. Is that something that we get a lot of questions about from advisors? And I think we do a good job of helping out with that. So there's a number of different ways when it comes to prospecting. I mean, there's public resources out there. One website is GuideStar. They have a paid subscription, but they also have a free version where you can still get a lot of good information. And it's got a direct link on there to their Form 990, which is just it's a form they have to file, IRS form they have to file every year. It's public record, but it can give you some good information like who the board members are, the amount of money they have, so the amount of cash as well as investable assets. It can show you things like who are they paying fees to for professional organizations, so you can see like are they paying a professional fundraising company or a consultant. Oftentimes you'll just see the tax preparer is listed, and which means that they're not working with any real outside consultants or professionals. So which could be a good indication that they might be very open to some help from an advisor or someone like yourself. Your networks, obviously people whether it be friends or anyone who sits on a board or is heavily involved with a charity, your current clients, great way to get a warm introduction to some of these organizations and the right people. Events and fundraisers. Some of the advisors that I work with that do really well in this area, they tend to join up on some of these events and they attend some of these fundraisers, and it's just a good way for advisors to really get entrenched into that world and get introductions and referrals. When you're looking at organizations, you want to keep an eye on asset levels. If it's really big, it's a nice, it's a temptation to go after something that's hundreds of millions of dollars. But those tend to be the organizations that have a professional staff, paid staff. They're working with multiple consultants. Where we think the sweet spot is those $2 to $3 million up to maybe 25, 30 million, where they have substantial assets. It would be a nice account for you to bring in, but they're also, in the world of nonprofits, they're still relatively small. So they might have mostly volunteers, or if you look at the headcount and size, you can see that maybe they look understaffed or people are doing multiple roles. That's another indication that they might be open to some guidance or help. And that also, the other thing to maybe look at, if some of the board members, just have an idea of their level of knowledge, especially on the investment side. We see a lot of times family foundations, they appoint their family members to the board and they don't know anything about investing. So sometimes that alone is a great way to get in with them. But I'd say, the best success I've seen for advisors is with current clients. If you have clients that sit on boards or they're heavily involved in these charities or know someone that is, they're the ones, like, they can give you the introductions. They can make that warm introduction and they can be a good fan for you and talk about how great you do as a financial advisor. And it's a great lead in. And I've seen the most success I've seen with advisors is having that warm introduction to someone from someone they know in the organization. So I think we have the poll results ready, Nick.
Yeah, let's bring those up. Okay, cool. So yeah, 74% of you say that yes, you do have individual clients who sit on nonprofit boards. So that's great. Yeah, I agree, Aaron. Like that seems to be probably the easiest, the number one way to get a lead. I'd say step one is that idea of targeting, like you talked about. I'd say step two is qualifying. You might also call this investigating, because what you want to do is determine why an organization needs an advisor. What are their pain points? And you can infer a lot of this just by knowing what type of portfolio this is. Again, whether if it's a private foundation, if it's an operating foundation, if it's a true endowment, a board designated fund, there's buckets that you can classify different organizations into. It also helps to ask a lot of questions. And the one thing about nonprofits, people at nonprofits, they're great networkers and they usually love to share their stories. And I like this list of examples of questions that we came up with. What are the main challenges your organization faces today? What does your nonprofit support in terms of geography, mission, constituency, etc.? Do you have committees? What committees do you sit on? Do you fundraise? Do you have a spending or investment policy? Or I might add on there a gift acceptance policy. Do you write grants? Or what's the history of your organization? Anything you can do to help get you insight into what will resonate with them is good, because the next step is where you put that info to good use by crafting a pitch. So step 3 is the pitch. Before this, you're really just networking. But when you have a formal pitch, you're taking the leap then into selling. When you think the time is right and you have the right contact in mind, again, I'm thinking mostly board members, investment committee members, CFOs, and executive directors. When you have all that in place, it's time to put together the pitch. And this is really an attention getter and a proof statement for why an organization should work with you. It's how to basically get your foot in the door. I am the type of person who likes to use a formula when building a pitch. It might not be everyone's forte, but it helps me. And so this is sort of the process that I like to use. It makes the process more repeatable and a little bit more also customizable. So the formula has 4 parts. You take a persona. So that could be a board member, an executive director, or a CFO. You add a challenge that they have. So that could be things like meeting their fiduciary duties, fundraising, spending, or income generation. You add in a solution that you can deliver. So that could be education, planning or monitoring, policy review, or the investments that you offer. You add in the result that you can achieve. So for example, growing assets, complying with laws, increasing donor retention, or generating more income. And all of that equals your attention grabber, your quick pitch. Think about how many emails you get daily. We are inundated with other people trying to grab our attention. And that's something that can be really tough to do sometimes. This is a way to craft a message that you can send. You can send it in an email. You can send it in a LinkedIn request. You can do it over the phone if you need it. But it's really important when you craft this that it's in their language. And it's really important that it addresses a pain point that you know that they have. And that it drives the next step. The next step being like, I'd love to sit down with you and discuss this idea in more detail. So here's an example. Board members, that's the persona, whose main priority is funding philanthropy in their community, that's the challenge, have used our planning and monitoring tools, that's the solution, to meet their fiduciary duties and grow their foundations over time. That's the result. Waiting for the right person at the right time, this can open doors because it's tailored to what you know about an organization. Okay, let me wrap things up then by going to sort of the third section we have today. And that's talking about a few case studies for how to find what the best solutions are for different nonprofits. I think I mentioned before, if you can offer a solution to a problem and make life just a little bit easier for board members, they'll love you for it. And so that is really the ultimate goal. The first example we have here is a small regional college. Okay, so key players might be the CFO and the endowment board. They have 2 pools of money. They have a donor restricted endowment for scholarships and an unrestricted endowment for operational support and long-term projects. They have a formal spending rule of 4% of the rolling 20-quarter average market value, but the board has discretion to exceed this amount on the unrestricted portion of their endowment. The challenge that is common in this situation is that the board might regularly exceed the spending rule on the unrestricted portion. Let's say that actual spending averages closer to 7% instead of 4% that the spending rule specifies. This experience might be familiar to a lot of you who work with individual investors. A client who spends too much, that might be pretty common. It happens in the nonprofit side too, and mostly in pools of money that aren't really donor restricted in some way. Donor restrictions are kind of a safeguard against this in a true endowment scenario. But it's common to find pools of assets that aren't restricted, and that in this case, like, spending is at the board's discretion. So a good approach to this is to have a planning conversation, I think. I like to approach these situations by saying right up front, this is not a value judgment on what you, quote, should spend. You, the board, you know a lot more about what your mission is, the good that this money is doing, and I'm not going to tell you what to do with your money. But also notice how similar this might sound as if you were talking to an individual investor. But the purpose of my involvement, this is me speaking again, is to help clarify what you want to accomplish with this money, and then give you the tools to help make an informed decision. As a fiduciary sitting on a board, you have to make an informed decision. There's no going by gut feeling here. So, let's put on our planning hats and figure this out. So, number one, let's talk about what this unrestricted pool is really meant to accomplish. The main question I would have, like in a scenario like this, would be like, is this a long-term pool that's meant to grow over time? And is it really meant to increase its support over time? Or do you intend to really focus the support on the immediate needs? And then number two, let's model some future outcomes under different scenarios. We can look at a bull market, a bear market, an average market. Let's see how things might play out over a range of different outcomes. The crux of the problem is that you spend 7% per year, and then that means you need at least an annual you need at least that in an annual return to replenish what you spend, and you probably need closer to 9 or 10% per year to grow in excess of inflation. So if that's the number one goal, if the number one goal again is to grow in excess of inflation, your spending is too high, because to achieve that high of a return, you have to take on quite a bit of risk. That exposes you to volatility, which if you're forced to take withdrawals when the value of your account is low, that means you then run the risk of permanently impairing assets, or maybe even depleting assets under the extreme scenario. But there's the flip side too. So maybe you really need this money to keep the lights on. Maybe COVID has created a whole bunch of new expenses for this school that they haven't had before, and this is how they're paying for it. There are good reasons to spend more today, but there are trade-offs for doing so. And with some simple modeling techniques, simple modeling of different outcomes and how they might happen, you can have these conversations. So you, the advisor, can help navigate what those trade-offs are for this type of organization. And then lastly, figure out if anything needs to change with the spending policy. Help them adjust their policy if needed, and then help them track their spending over time so they can actually see if they're adhering to if they have a new policy or an old policy or whatever it may be. All of this positions you as helping meet their fiduciary duty. Every organization should have a process they undertake when doing things like setting a policy or deviating from that policy. And it's you as the advisor, you are the guide to guide them through that process. All right, we have one more case study here, another one for private grant-making foundations. Sometimes these are a little different beasts than the schools and the hospitals and things like that. In this case, let's suppose there's a private foundation that's run by a single family. That's a very common scenario. I've been in meetings that feel a lot more like a family reunion than a board meeting. Suppose they write grants benefiting a variety of local institutions and scholarship recipients. Suppose they have to adhere to the minimum IRS spending requirement of 5% per year. And suppose they're not especially sophisticated. about markets or investing or anything like that. The challenge that an organization like this faces is that they need a lot of oversight. Managing day-to-day investment decisions, that's a given. But also, how can they easily meet their fiduciary duties over time? How do they transition responsibilities to the next generation of family members when it's their turn? How do they keep track of the big picture? Or are they making progress towards actually growing the grants they want to write? I mean, these are important questions that they want oversight and help answering. I've found that successful advisors are the ones that provide the oversight and the continuity in a situation like this. So first, it's first a good idea to understand the goals of the foundation. That's probably as close to a universal first step in most situations as you can get. But second, they create a monitoring report to track progress and meet fiduciary duties. I've seen successful advisors position this as a fiduciary monitoring report. It's more than just performance results. It's more akin to a planning report, like on the individual side, but it essentially tries to answer the question, how have we progressed towards our goals? And is there anything we should do differently to stay on track toward meeting those goals? You can show how the value of their assets have changed over time. That's important to know. You can show how much they've withdrawn over the years to fund grant making. That's really important. You can reaffirm their characteristics, their time horizon, withdrawal needs, risk tolerance, and reaffirm if anything should change in their investment policy to keep them on track. And a report like this doesn't have to be delivered very often, maybe once per year. But getting into the habit of treating this like sort of like a regular checkup, that can go a long way toward giving the board comfort that they have this additional level of oversight that's keeping an eye on the big picture. And all of this, a report like this serves as a point of continuity too. If a new board member comes along and they want to see the history of the foundation and where it's headed, hand them this report. It's easy. And then lastly, trustee education and training. It takes a little bit of work on the front end to create materials maybe, but I like the idea of helping onboard new trustees or board members. It's a good way to win them over to your way of thinking, number one, but it's also just the right thing to do when someone's new, especially a younger family member who wants to know how to be a good trustee. I think they need to know like some common topics to get trained on. I think they need to know about investments, about market history, fiduciary duties and spending policies. But there's any number of good topics that might depend on your expertise. But you could cover things like where you see the economy right now, or recent legislation, how that might affect things at the foundation, things like that. But again, the bottom line with all of these solutions, you are being a valuable advisor in this setup. You're providing oversight, continuity, expertise. That's what you can provide a foundation like this. And that's what they value the most. Aaron, let me send it back over to you to wrap us up.
Thanks, Nick. Thanks. So obviously that was a lot of information. We just scratched the surface on what we can offer here. We just wanted to give you basically an overview of some of the things we offer. Again, we have different investment solutions that are suitable for nonprofits, as we've been managing money, like I said, for 40 years for these type of organizations. But yeah, in addition to that, we have great resources to help you. Ideas for prospecting. We have Nick's team as a source of expertise. So we have a lot of great resources. And this is just the first of many modules that we are going to offer and provide to you. In the future, we plan to dive deeper into topics such as maybe fiduciary and governance practices, fundraising, spending policies. I will reemphasize that I have advisor partners who really have brought in some significant new assets, referrals, and higher revenue by working with these organizations. But a lot of these organizations, bottom line, they need help. You can be an advisor to help them grow, become a stronger organization, and then grow your practice while doing so. So, as I mentioned, there's going to be a survey coming out after this. On that survey, there'll be a wholesaler map. So I encourage you to connect with us, learn more about the resources and how we can partner with you to work with these organizations and grow your business. Also, again, on that survey, there will be information for those of you who are looking for CFP CE credit. If you there's on the survey, there's some information there to get you that credit. So I'm going to answer some questions now. Let me just take a look here. So one question: for nonprofits who are just starting out, what are some of the major do's and don'ts or common mistakes you find committees or board members make? How can advisors guide them as they are refining how charitable contributions fit into their mission?
Yeah, so I can answer that one, Aaron. I'd say for smaller organizations that again are just starting out, I think failing to prepare for the long term is a common mistake and something that a lot of advisors can help with. And so there's a couple different long-term planning areas. So number one is how are operations going to be funded? And a lot of organizations are just honestly focused on the day-to-day. They don't give much thought into like long-term funding ideas or cultivating long-term relationships with donors so that eventually maybe if they're starting out at the annual fund level, they can be cultivated and grow into more of like a planned donor or a repeat annual giver. I don't think that's, I think more investment is wise there, to invest in a program to constantly cultivate and solicit your donors so that they eventually become long-term participants in the health of your organization. But you can also look at it from an investment standpoint too. A lot of organizations, they don't have endowed money, or maybe they have very small endowments. A lot of them are looking for ways to grow those assets. So that's a good thing. But the fact that not a lot of foresight or planning was put into doing that sooner, that's a mistake that I think too many organizations make. So again, sometimes you have to wait for that big planned gift for the right time to start a long-term endowment, something like that. But if you have one in place and if you can grow it over time, that can just be an endowment can be a great source of stability in uncertain times. I mean, and we've seen that so much this year. I mean, many organizations have said, I wish I had socked away a little bit in a longer term vehicle of some sort, in like an endowment or a foundation, so that I would have been better prepared when the government pulled their support in 2020. So those are some common issues or common mistakes I see that a lot of advisors can help with.
Thanks, Nick. We did have several questions asking about the slides. On that survey that we're sending out, there'll be a link to the replay, but if you want actual copy of the slides, just like I said, on the survey, there's a map, a wholesaler map. So just reach out to us and we can get you a copy of those. Another question is, how do you balance the need to support both current and future students? So for a school, I guess. And then in other words, how do you justify current stakeholder spending versus next generation focused spending?
Yeah, this is a common question that you might get today. So a little bit of spending math. The true neutral, in my mind, for balancing current stakeholders and future stakeholders is a spending rate of about 4 to 5%. That's just about the maximum that you can spend today, and still hope to grow those assets on a real basis going forward. 4 or 5% plus maybe 2 or 3% inflation, that gives you a target of about 8%. And that's pretty achievable, again, over the long term, in a balanced type of portfolio of stocks and bonds. That doesn't mean that every organization has to spend 4 or 5%. Some will spend more, some will spend less. You need to take into consideration what your needs are. Anything less than 4 or 5%, you're probably emphasizing the current stakeholders a little bit more. Anything more than 4 or 5%, I'm sorry, the other way around. Anything less than 4 or 5%, you're probably emphasizing the future a little bit more. Anything more than 4 or 5%, you're probably emphasizing current stakeholders a little bit more at the expense of the future. But finding that right balance, yeah, I mean, that's definitely something an advisor with all of your knowledges can help with. And it's a common question. I mean, how should we spend smartly, and what should be our priorities? Boards answer the priority question. You can ask a board, what are your priorities for this money, and how do you want to use it? And then you as the advisor can say, okay, that translates into a spending rule like this. And this is what sort of outcomes might happen depending on which route you take.
Thanks, Nick. Another one on ESG, which is a big topic, especially now. How big is ESG in this market, and what kind of growth do we see in ESG type portfolios for these? And I guess I'll say, I mean, we've been studying and working with ESG for a long time, and we actually have a dedicated ESG portfolio. But maybe Nick can expand a little bit on what he's seen in his experience.
I've seen a lot of organizations start asking about it. Yeah, especially in the past few years. A lot are trying to get, they have a financial goal, but they also want to have a social goal too. They want to do good with this money. A lot of them are under pressure from, again, their constituents, their donors, students in the case of a school. Yeah, there's pressure out there to look into ESG and learn more about it. I think there's different flavors of ESG. I mean, there's different ways you can implement it. The most common I've seen are either using screening criteria or using a dedicated ESG portfolio that integrate ESG factors right into the security selection process or index selection process. But even beyond that, there's also the concept of, like on the private foundation side, there's the concept of impact investing. Actually investing money in the community that you're trying to serve. And maybe you get a financial return out of it, maybe you don't. Maybe it's treated more as a donation. But there's a whole spectrum of different ESG options that a lot of organizations are trying to learn about. And yeah, it helps. So it helps to know sort of what's out there, what's available.
Okay. And then another one, if I want to start prospecting pretty soon / immediately, what's the best way to go about it? So we touched on that a little bit, and I think, again, I'm just going to reinforce, I think the best way to do that is with folks, especially clients, because they can be an advocate for you and based on what they've seen of your work with them. So I think start with people and that's a great way to kind of get your feet wet and get started. Again, I would reach out to us. Those questions that Nick shared, we have a list of those questions plus some more that can really help you get the conversation going, and turn them more from just a contact to actually a true prospect. But yeah, I'd say that's probably your best bet. That's where I've seen the most success is with people you already know. It kind of goes along the lines of with a lot of these boards. Sometimes there's some bureaucratic red tape. They're not just going to open the doors to everyone. So sometimes you do need some sort of a warm introduction to get in with them and to begin with. So I'd say that's a good start. Think about who that's on the boards. Go through your client list. Maybe if you're not keeping track, it could be a way for you next time you have a review with clients, just ask them if they're involved in boards and everything. And then you have those questions ready to go, where you could start talking to them and maybe get that conversation going. So I think that right there is a good answer on that. We have a lot of questions coming in, so I'm going to try to get to them all. If I don't, then we will follow up with you immediately, or I'm sorry, immediately after the presentation. I got let's see, in the chat box. Let me just see this here. There's a long one. In my experience, most board members focus on recent performance. Then every 5 years, they go out for an RFP. Usually the RFP draws proposals that show higher performance, sometimes based on hypotheticals for current models. It is not unusual to see boards selecting the highest seeming performance. Results frequent changes in investment management. For the most part, these relationships are not sticky, little loyalty. Helping to revise spending plans helps and may trump the focus on performance. Again, in my experience, we agree. That's what we are trying to really do here is give you ways to take away the investment focus of your discussions and everything you do for these organizations and focus more on what are you doing to make them stronger. In the beginning, I gave that example about that team that went in and got a $32 million endowment. What set them apart was talking to the organization about how they can become stronger, how they can become better run. Those are the things that will help insulate any short-term underperformance, right? And keep them focused on, wow, this advisor is doing so much for the organization. So I understand what you're saying in that comment.
Some organizations, yeah, I mean, you do have to be aware some organizations have it in their policy to do an RFP every 3 or 5 years or whatever it may be. That's a fact of life for some organizations, not all, but some. But I think you're right, Aaron, to the extent possible to focus the discussion not on relative performance, but on meeting goals and helping with spending and the more consultative help that you might be able to offer. I think that's going to be what makes it go from not sticky to much more sticky in the long run.
Another question was the website I mentioned before. That's GuideStar. It got bought out by an organization called Candid. But if you just Google GuideStar, you'll find it. And just pop on. You can do a free sign up. Like I said, they do have a pay for version, which gets a little bit more in depth. But I think the free version is sufficient to get you started. And then the other thing you can look at, just if you have an organization in mind, go on their website and just look around, pop around. There might be some common sense things that you see that, what it might look like there's nowhere to give, right? There's nowhere to donate, or they don't make it easy. That's just one suggestion right there. Why not make it very easy for people on that website to make a donation? So the websites of the organizations are also a great place to look. What else? What are the big, Nick, this is for you. What are the biggest differences that you see between an endowment and a foundation?
Yeah, so the terminology is a little bit confusing. It can be different from organization to organization. An endowment, a true endowment, is money that was given by a donor that's meant to last into perpetuity. And it can be restricted for spending on a specific purpose, like a building or a scholarship or whatever, or it can be really unrestricted. But the primary thing that makes it an endowment is that it's forever. It's endowed and it's meant to last forever. A foundation is usually what houses, it can house different endowments within a foundation. So a foundation is there's a foundation for that supports the hospital, a hospital, or a foundation that can support a school. But that's sort of a weird example because they call that an endowment. So the terminology is confusing, but a foundation is more just the general aggregation of a lot of endowed assets or non-endowed assets, but the purpose is to support the organization in some way. And then an endowment is more specific, a specific donation from a donor that's meant to last into perpetuity. And then just one more thing that even makes it more confusing. The IRS has different classifications for what is a foundation. And so there can be foundations, again, that are grant makers, Those are private foundations, but they're called foundations. And then foundations that are operational. And again, those foundations are things that support hospitals, schools, churches, you name it. So I hope that helps.
So we're kind of hitting the top of the hour here. Again, we have some questions. I apologize, we're not going to be able to get to, but we have your names, and we will reach out to you individually for those and get you some answers. But yeah, like I said, I encourage everyone on the call, look at the map you're going to get on the survey. Feel free. I'd love to have you and reach out to me and my counterparts individually. We could have a conversation about anything today, and how we can be more of a help to you and what resources we can offer. So thank you for your time, and we all look forward to working with you closer. Thank you.